All right, let's talk about what happens when a truly massive, powerful empire starts to crumble from the inside. We're going to dive deep into the very beginning of ancient Egypt's third intermediate period, a really fascinating time when this kingdom, once totally unified, was literally split in two. Let's get into it. I mean, it's a huge question, right? How does a superpower just collapse? And ancient Egypt is such an amazing case study because it wasn't some big foreign invasion or one single disaster. Nope. This was a slow fracture, something that happened from within. So how on earth did the land of the pharaohs end up so divided? So our story really kicks off at the tail end of Egypt's most amazing chapter, the New Kingdom. This was the time of the legends. We're talking King Tut, Ramesses the Great. But yeah, that golden age was sputtering out in a pretty chaotic way. What happens is the last pharaoh of the New Kingdom, a guy named Ramesses the 11th, dies. And when he does, the royal power just vanishes. The central government that had held Egypt together for centuries, it completely fell apart, and that led to all sorts of chaos. The economy tanked, society was in turmoil, and get this, tomb robberies went through the roof because law and order basically disappeared. And that's really the heart of the issue right there. With the pharaoh's authority gone, Egypt was just left leaderless. And this power vacuum, well, it is the single most important thing that sets the stage for everything that comes next. So, the big question is, who fills that vacuum? And the answer is nobody. Well, not one person anyway. Power didn't just get handed over to a new ruler, it shattered, and it created two totally separate centers of power that would come to define this whole new era for Egypt. Okay, so take a look at this map. It lays it all out pretty clearly. You've got this new geographical split. Up in the north, that's Lower Egypt with a brand new capital city called Tanis, right in the Nile Delta. And then, way down south in Upper Egypt, you've got the old-school religious hub, the city of Thebes, which held on to its power. And really, that statement says it all. That's the new political reality in a nutshell. For the first time in a very, very long time, Egypt wasn't one country under one king anymore. It was a nation with two capitals and two sets of rulers. All right, so let's dig into the thirst of these new power centers. We're going to start up in the north, in that new capital city of Tanis, home to a whole new line of kings. Meet Smendes I. This is the guy who steps into that power vacuum in the north and founds what we now call the 21st Dynasty. He sets up shop in Tanis and, for all intents and purposes, becomes the ruler of all of Lower Egypt. Now, here's the crucial thing you gotta understand about these Tanite kings. They absolutely claimed all the official titles of a pharaoh. On paper, they were the real deal. But in reality, their power was pretty limited. They only really controlled the northern half of the country. And even then, they had to work hard to seem legit, which is why you see them pushing the cult of the main state god, Amun, so heavily. Okay, so that's the north. Now let's travel south down the Nile, because there's a whole other half to this story. In the great city of Thebes, a totally different kind of power was taking hold. It wasn't royal, it was religious. See, down south, the real power players were the high priests of Amun in Thebes, guys like Herihor and Pinigem I. They weren't kings, not officially, but they had incredible influence. They controlled the massive temple lands and basically ran Upper Egypt like a theocracy, a state governed by religious authority. And even though they didn't call themselves pharaohs, these high priests, they sure acted the part. I mean, they controlled the land, the army, the economy of the entire South. And what's more, they started using royal parks, like writing their names in those famous cartouches. They were really blurring the line between priest and king. So what does this all look like when you put the two halves together? Well, you get this really complex, kind of weird political situation that Egypt had never really seen before. It was this delicate and probably confusing new balance of power. This slide really breaks it down perfectly, side by side. You have the Tanite kings up north, holding the legitimate, official royal titles, but they only really control Lower Egypt. And then, down south, you have the Theban high priests, who have the actual, on-the-ground, de facto power over Upper Egypt, all thanks to their massive religious influence. Now, you'd think this setup would be a recipe for disaster, right? Like constant civil war? But, and this is the really wild part, that's not what happened. A lot of the time, these two power centers actually cooperated. You see political marriages between the two families, and they kind of just accepted this strange two-headed system. They sort of needed each other to keep things from completely falling apart. Just to put this all in perspective, let's look at the timeline real quick. The New Kingdom officially breathes its last around 1077 BCE. Just a handful of years later, by 1069 BCE, this new divided reality is fully in place. That's the start of the Third Intermediate Period and the 21st Dynasty, which would actually last for more than 100 years. But no matter how well they got along, sometimes you just couldn't escape one simple fact. That central, unified vision that had defined Egypt for more than 1,000 years, it was gone. As the source material puts it so perfectly, national unity was lost. And that really leaves us with this big question to chew on, doesn't it? The 21st Dynasty in Egypt, they managed to create this stable, if divided, state. But it makes you wonder, can a nation ever really be at its strongest? Can it truly thrive when its power is fundamentally split right at the very top? It's a question Egypt wrestled with back then, and honestly, it's one that's still pretty relevant today.